The year is 2030 and the People's Liberation Army just launched a massive invasion of Taiwan. The US Marine Corps is thrust into action, landing thousands of troops on the beaches of nearby remote islands. Then, the shipping lanes in the Middle East near the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea come under attack by Iran and its proxies. In this scenario, World War III has just kicked off. Now, what type of weapons and vehicles will best serve the Marines in these battles? You might be surprised to learn the US Marines believe that their M1 Abrams main battle tanks would only hold them back. They've officially decided to ditch their tanks, dissolving all 7 of their long, storied tank companies as part of their bold but risky Force Design 2030 plan. This controversial decision will call for the Corps to get rid of most of their gun-based artillery and a whole host of other vehicles and aircraft in exchange for new capabilities. I'm just over here munching on crayons in solidarity with my Marine friends. On face value, this might sound crazy, but if you ask me, I think it's crazy like a fox. What are the pros and cons of this new plan? What are some of the common misconceptions and myths about Force Design 2030? I'm your average infantryman, Cappy. Fire off around the like and subscribe button and let's find out. This video's sponsor is Fume, the flavorful way to break free. Fume is an innovative and award-winning solution to changing the way you break free from your habit. With no electronics, Fume is completely natural. No vapors or smoke, just the stuff we all love so much, good clean air. With the world embracing modern solutions to old problems, why should breaking bad habits be any different? If you have nervous, fidgety fingers, you're in luck. Because Fume is perfectly balanced, it has some weight to it, and it's extremely fun to fidget with, which is helpful for de-stressing while breaking your habit. We all put stopping off because it's hard to do, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and fun. Fume has served over 100,000 customers and has thousands of success stories. So head to tryfume.com/taskpurpose or scan the QR code and use code TASKPURPOSE to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. That's tryfum.com and use code TASKPURPOSE to save an additional 10% off your order today. That's fresh. A few of the more astute among us have noticed that tanks don't really float very well in water at all. So why are they even a part of amphibious forces in the first place? Because in World War II, the Marines used tanks in their island hopping campaigns to knock out enemy fortifications like pillboxes and trench lines. These defensive positions are often missed by air and naval bombardments. But if you're no longer planning to fight a contested amphibious assault on beaches, do you still need these tanks? Since then, the Marine tank crews have proudly served in just about every major combat engagement. They used the M1 Abrams to great effect in the 2003 war in Iraq to help capture Fallujah. But is this type of fighting what the next generation of Marines will be asked to face? With 80 years of combat success behind them, it sounds crazy to give up the tanks, but the Devil Dogs have a method to their madness. There is a problem in the Pacific region that military planners refer to as the tyranny of distance. This refers to the incredible challenges and difficulties posed by the vast 1.3 million square miles and over 250 islands, atolls, shoals, and reefs that comprise the South China Sea. The Marine Corps Force Design 2030 plan aims to reshape the entire Corps from top to bottom in less than 10 years into a smaller, more distributed force that can spread out and control this territory better. The Commandant of the Marine Corps is convinced they can even be more lethal by transforming into a lighter, more maneuverable unit. Okay, we've diagnosed the problem, so what's the solution? As much as the Marine Corps loves its tanks, they have an enormous footprint, both in terms of logistics and battlefield signature. The M1 Abrams weighs 60 tons, and the more modern version weighs 74 tons. What this means is the landing craft air cushion, or LCAC, has to use up its entire payload capacity of 75 tons on that one tank. I've spoken to some active duty Marine Corps officers who've said that the LCAC isn't really great at transporting modern day main battle tanks that have grown in weight since this transport was invented back in the 1980s. On the other hand, JLTVs can fire missiles and are closer to like 8 tons, which means technically you could carry about 9 on shore. Losing the tanks would hypothetically free up weight to bring more missile ammunition, power generators, water purification systems that'll make the Marines self-sufficient on islands for longer periods of time without needing resupply. Haven't we learned anything from watching like 50 seasons of Survivor by now? Tanks require more room for spare parts and fuel, and it's a real challenge to keep them supplied across rough, marshy terrain once they're actually on shore. Contrary to popular belief, the Marines do not expect to make contested landings against dug-in enemy forces. However, this isn't to say Force Design 2030 couldn't be useful in a contested amphibious assault. In fact, it's specifically designed to be better suited for this potential occasion. The Marines have been criticized for basically turning into the United States' Second Army. This has led to critics to claim their capabilities are redundant, because over the past few decades in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Corps has gotten bigger, heavier, and moved away from its naval focus. In theory, the Force Design 2030 would allow a small company of about 100 Marines to be positioned on islands in order to pose an outsized threat to nearby enemy naval forces. So the plan seeks to force the enemy to divert their troops and resources to counter this small element of US Marines. For an attacking military like China, hypothetically, they would want to create an economy of effort. What this means is they would aim to avoid dispersing their forces and resources across a wide area. In military theory, there's a concept called massing forces. You want to bring overwhelming force to bear on a specific target, and that's what China would seek to do. But Force Design 2030 aims to make the PLA spread out and unfocused. The Marines want to become an expert at sea denial. Instead of being a multi-tool jack of all trades, they want to go to be the anti-access area denial forces. Every Marine would still be a rifleman, as we know, but under this new plan, they would also be a kind of island survivalist. US leadership believes having a credible fast reaction amphibious force is a top priority. According to this new school of thought, main battle tanks just don't fit into the picture, at least not like how you might expect. The Marines had about 450 tanks in their inventory, which were the old M1A1 variant, that lacked a lot of the more modern survivability capabilities that tanks require against a near peer today. They would have been pretty much forced into an expensive and time-consuming upgrade process. To get a picture of just how expensive this process would be, when the Army upgraded 174 M1A1s to the M1A2 SEP version 3, it cost them $714 million. Projecting those numbers out, it would have cost the Corps between $1.5 and $1.85 billion to upgrade their entire inventory. This is just some average infantryman back of the napkin math though. This ambitious plan is the brainchild of former Marine Corps Commandant David H. Berger. General Berger argues, quote, "We must divest certain existing capabilities and capacities to free resources for essential new capabilities. The most logical way is to take a systems perspective and reduce infantry battalions while proportionally reducing support battalions." Marines aren't stereotypically known for their logic. They're usually known for blasting the enemy into dust, but let's give this plan the benefit of the doubt just for a second. In other words, what General Berger is saying is that unless funding the Marine Corps suddenly jumps up and increases, the service has to divest before it can invest. Cutting the size of the force and outdated support elements frees up an estimated $12 billion. So let's see what the Marines will get in return for saving that money. Give every Marine regiment a battery of long-range anti-ship missiles that they can hide in the jungles and mountains with. Now we're talking modern littoral zone warfare. We've seen direct evidence of this plan being put into action in November 2023. The military put out a public request for defense contractors to try to develop what's called the Mobile Long-Range Precision Strike Missile. This is the publicsam.gov publication of it. You can go to this site right now and put in your own bid on the project if you like. The link is in the description. Its requirements state that the missiles have to be 25-kilometer in range and can be transported by light tactical vehicles. Not sure why the DoD rejected my submission, but you can still try. Field experiments that the Marines recently ran found that these missiles can knock out an enemy tank at 15 to 20 times the range that a main battle tank is capable of. And this gets to the basis of what a smaller but meaner and leaner force is designed to achieve. Experts believe the Marine Corps would likely not be able to rely on traditional advantages like air superiority and heavy support, not in a contested zone like the Western Pacific. Anything that's too big and concentrated is just begging to get hit with a missile or drone. Instead, dispersed yet coordinated forces that can maneuver and operate while continually within an enemy's weapon engagement zone are the way to go. A concept the Marines call stand-in forces. Now, stand-in forces are this small element that will provide intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. They'll give support for target designation and conduct sea denial for nearby naval campaigns. Marine units have already been redesignated as stand-in forces. Their goal is to deter war from ever happening. The theory is that just their presence alone will dissuade the PLA. To understand Marines' line of thinking, they believe China has spent decades studying the United States military tactics and specifically developed weapon capabilities to counter the United States tactics like their long-range missiles. But if the Marines disperse and use a higher number of lower-cost platforms, they put the calculation back in their favor. Achieving these goals isn't something that tweaking the existing force structure can accomplish. According to the Marines, they need a radically reshape itself from the top-bottom, so the service is testing out a new form of organization called the Marine Littoral Regiment. Littoral means a region close to or along the shore. The new regiment will be made up of an anti-air battalion, a combat logistics battalion, and it will be designed to be mobile, low signature, easy to maintain and sustain, while also resilient to a constant threat of the enemy. Marine Lieutenant General Eric Smith, the Deputy Commandant for Combat Development and Integration, spoke to USNI News saying, "If I can sink one of your $1.5 billion warships with a $1.5 million missile, I am a threat, and that may change the calculus." It's actually similar to what we see the Houthis are doing in the Red Sea. They're taking this distributed force idea. This force by the Marine Corps will include an infantry battalion, an anti-ship missile battery. This will allow the littoral combat team to punch well above its weight. This helps explain why the Marines had doubled their investment in HIMARS artillery to $134 million. These lightweight rocket artillery with 70 kilometers range are seen as better than gun-based artillery for their new purposes. The Marines have a long tradition of being a quick response force, but this new plan seeks to double down on that aspect. To that end, they also invested $40 million in the Oshkosh Unmanned Rogue Fire System, which is a remotely operated missile system. You basically rip the cab off a vehicle and slap a naval strike missile on there. Now, these naval strike missiles have a warhead of about 260 pounds that can hit targets 250 kilometers or 160 miles away. Imagine the Marines placing dozens of these around an island and remotely firing them from safety. This Nemesis truck is key to the Marine Corps' new plan because during their RIMPAC training events, they claimed it allowed troops to help protect an entire carrier strike group off the shores of the island. It's not just the fancy mobile missile launchers getting upgraded though. I remember the first whiff I got of a major change in the Marine Corps was when I heard every single Marine would be issued suppressors for their rifle, or at least every combat infantry Marine. The idea of having a low signature extends from the lowest rifleman to the most fancy piece of artillery. Infantry will be equipped with a new squad common optic. One Marine with this scope is worth at least 2 soldiers with no optic. 8 Ready Hero 120 loitering munitions per MCL. The aerial loitering munition is considered to be one of the most transformative new abilities. This is part of the Organic Precision Fires program. The whole point of this program is to increase the attack range to 50 kilometers at the company level. What this means is your lower level troops don't have to constantly call up command and get permission for long range weapons. They will already have them in the back of a truck or backpack. They're also going to field the new lightweight Javelin missile launcher. It's about 35% smaller and lighter. 3 of these will be issued per company, or about 1 per platoon. Marines are also starting to adopt the amphibious combat vehicle to replace the old 1970s era AAV. Tanks aren't the only asset under the chopping block because the 16 gun-based artillery batteries are getting tossed out as well. Out with the old, in with the new. This will leave the Corps with 5 remaining batteries. Much of the service is also getting downsized with 3 squadrons of Ospreys and heavy helicopters, 2 squadrons of light attack helicopters, and 5 infantry battalions getting the axe. This will also be a reduction of fighter squadron sizes down to 10 aircraft. As a whole, the service expects to have 12,000 fewer Marines by 2030. That's not a huge problem since their total strength is currently 180,000 active duty with 32,000 in reserve. At first, I thought maybe this downsizing really just has something to do with low recruitment numbers that the Army, Air Force, and basically every military around the world, including China, is facing right now. But in reality, the Marines have actually met or exceeded their recruitment goals year after year. I'm guessing it's thanks to those sick Dragon commercials. There are many common misconceptions about the Marine transformation. Marines will still have access to main battle tanks, although in a different form. The tanks that the Marines are divesting will go straight to the US Army, who the Marines can coordinate with still, and they can call in to work alongside when needed. The master behind this plan, former General Berger, knows a little about Marines, since he commanded at every level, including peace missions and reconnaissance company commander in Haiti in 2004, and in combat missions as a leader of a regiment combat unit in Fallujah in Iraq. He's been in the Corps since 1981. When he joined, it was Ronald Reagan's first year in office. It always surprises me to see when leadership like this, it's been around forever, is willing to look at everything that they helped build and decide, yeah, This is all wrong. Tear it down, tear it all down. But this is what leaders are supposed to do. Take stock and figure out if their organization is prepared for the next fight. But not every Marine is on board with this controversial plan. Just like there are movie critics, we also have military critics. Over 24 retired Marine Corps generals, including former Defense Secretary James Mattis, has openly criticized Force Design 2030 and the radical reshaping of the Corps. Marine Colonel Bing West, for instance, states Force Design 2030 is designed to land very small groups of Marines armed with a few anti-ship missiles on uninhabited islands. All the islands in the Taiwan Strait, East China Sea, Strait of Hormuz, and the Black, Baltic, and Mediterranean seas are heavily inhabited. It is a truism that all vehicles, not just tanks, are vulnerable. No army, however, can operate without vehicles, including the Marine Corps. The Marines can't fight in an urban setting without tanks. The critics argue that a new force would be too hyper-specialized around a small island-based campaign. They claim this plan forgets the time-tested fundamentals of warfare. Anthony Zinni summed it up when he said, "We think the cuts are far too drastic and really greatly diminish the capability of the Marine Corps as a combined arms team and move it away from its traditional role." If Force Design 2030 was a movie, the critics would give it 40% rating and audience would give it 90%. The supporters of Force Design 2030 have nicknamed its critics graybeards, which implies that these critics are out of touch with today's emerging threats. I mean, one could actually understand where these old school Marines are coming from. Some of them are the same officers who already transformed the Marines once in the past from attrition warfare into maneuver warfare back in the 1970s and 80s. Ironically, they faced a lot of skeptics and criticism about their transformation, even though ultimately history has proven that change was beneficial. I mean, basically every time the Marines have had to reinvent themselves to face a new adversary, there's always been former officers who doubted the new plans. It's basically par of the course at this point. I want to introduce you to a major challenge the Marines have just started to articulate, called Hider-Finder Challenge. Remaining hidden while finding the enemy first. This is why there is a major focus on intel collecting and counterintelligence. The Marines are using some of that saved money to invest in the alternate precision navigation timing mechanism, which is called the APNT, because that's long as heck of a name. The APNT allows for navigation even if the enemy destroys your GPS. They're also investing in UAVs at the platoon level that can pass data in ways that are not reliant on satellites. These systems will put out decoys to force China into spreading their forces out even more. This intelligence game requires close coordination with the Navy's assets. The Marine Regiment needs to be able to feed accurate information directly to and from friendly warships and aircraft. What this does is provide a more full picture of the information space for every commander on the field. The Marine Littoral Regiment wasn't thrown together out of thin air either. The concept was developed based on thousands of hours of wargaming and empirical data specific to the Indo-Pacific theater. According to Marine Corps leadership, the MLR idea has potential enemies shaking in their boots. General Eric Smith said, quote, "Adversaries do not like this concept at all. They don't like the fact that units are highly mobile and they have a low signature, and that the adversary doesn't know where these things are. Tanks have too high of a visual signature, and gun-based artillery is too static and short-ranged. But staying dispersed and mobile in jungle terrain is a lot easier to do with a smaller force structure, which is why Force Design 2030 emphasizes the lean approach. It's the difference between loading up a couple infantry teams into an Osprey or small raiding boats and hopping to the next island versus waiting an afternoon for a heavy transport to load and drop off a tank platoon. 2 of the 7 Marine infantry regiments are reconfigured into this Marine Littoral Regiment. Meanwhile, the other 5 will keep the regular structure. The vision is to have each Marine unit be an asymmetric threat, equipped with long-range precision weapons along with both air and sea drones that can locate the enemy for an integrated Navy attack. The Marine Corps is currently testing out the Marine Littoral Regiment concept by standing up one in Hawaii. And the idea is further refined over the coming years. We could see the MLR units forward deployed to the Western Pacific, making every inch of coastline a hazard zone if China moves against Taiwan or other US allies around the world. A major aspect to Force Design 2030 that I've seen constantly brought up is called pre-positioning supplies. Weapons and vehicles need to already be in place. These forward-deployed fortifications around the world are key to the plan, success or not. It's a way to offset the US military's potential disadvantage of having a numerically smaller force. The dissenting view also argues that the changes were made without being adequately tested and signed off on. Force Design 2030 claims to be based on war games and empirical evidence, but critics say that the changes were based on theoretical models and then moved right into the prime time without testing the concept on smaller parts of the force first. Critics also claim the Marines would be at a disadvantage if they were called into combat to protect Europe in a ground war. Of course, critics will point to the fact that Russian and Ukrainian forces have faced heavy losses of tank assets and their war has ground into attritional warfare. But something to keep in mind is the fact that the only way to resupply your forces is by sending them through sea. So securing freedom of navigation in the sea is vital. In spite of the argument that the idea hasn't been properly tested, since 2019, the Marines and partner forces have conducted over 25 full-scale war games and 42 integrated planning teams. So far, these tests have supported the radical new shape of the Marine Corps. For one, dispersed yet integrated units were more resilient and sustainable in the sort of denied environments we'd expect from an open war with China. Still, war games and exercises are based on certain assumptions. They're sophisticated and have been incredibly useful tools throughout military history, but there's always the chance that they miss something that can only be revealed in the heat of combat. No plan survives contact with the enemy. And in an increasingly unpredictable world, is this really the time to radically reshape one of America's premier fighting forces, or is the modernization window ticking down to zero with each passing day? I want to know what you think. Did the Marines take the right move in throwing out their tanks to adopt an entirely new method of waging war, or are the critics correct that the Corps leadership is too narrowly focused and the Army may not always be around to bail out the Marines when they need big tanks and guns? I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Follow me on Instagram at CappyArmy. Slap that like and subscribe button to help promote this report if you found it valuable. Signing off, I'm ThisNet. Time now.